I set down my coffee cup, looked my mother-in-law straight in the eye and said, "Then I guess I'll just call my property manager." She blinked. My husband blinked. The whole table went quiet, and I smiled. "My name is Iris and I just turned 32. I'm a CPA at a mid-size firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of job where you spend 40 hours a week staring at spreadsheets and another 10 hours explaining to clients why their creative expense deductions are going to get them audited. I'm good at numbers. I've always been good at numbers. My grandmother used to say I came out of the womb counting. I grew up in Asheville, about 2 hours west of Charlotte. My parents divorced when I was 9, and I was raised mostly by my mom and my grandmother, who we called Nana Jo. Nana Jo was not a warm cookie-baking grandmother. She was sharp, practical, and deeply suspicious of anyone who couldn't explain where their money was going. She worked as a bookkeeper for 40 years, owned her own house outright by the time she was 50, and believed that financial independence was the only kind of freedom that mattered. When Nana Jo passed away 6 years ago, she left me something I wasn't expecting. A paid-off duplex in the South End neighborhood of Charlotte and 2 trusts and a letter that said, "Don't tell a man what you have until you know what he's worth." I kept that letter. I kept it in a fireproof box under my bed, and I thought about it every time I made a major financial decision. I met my husband at a work conference in Raleigh. He was presenting a panel on logistics software. I was there for a tax compliance seminar next door. We ended up at the same hotel bar, and he made me laugh harder than I had in years. His name is Miles. He's tall, a little scatterbrained about anything that isn't his job, and he has a genuinely kind face, the kind that makes you want to trust him immediately. We dated for 2 years. He knew I owned property. I told him I had a rental situation in South End. That was technically accurate. What I did not tell him was that the rental situation was a duplex I'd turned into 4 units through a permitted conversion, that I owned 2 additional single-family homes in the University City area that I'd purchased at tax sales, or that Nana Jo's trusts had been invested in index funds for 6 years and were now worth considerably more than when I'd inherited them. I wasn't hiding it to deceive him. I was following Nana Jo's advice. I wanted to know who he was before I handed him a financial roadmap of my life. We got married 14 months ago. Small ceremony, 30 people, a venue in the mountains outside Asheville that my mom found on Airbnb. It was perfect. The only complicated part was my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law is a woman who walks into every room like she's already decided she owns it. Her name is Lorraine, and she grew up in a small town in South Carolina, married well, and has spent the last 30 years building an identity around being the matriarch of her family. She has a way of saying things that sound like compliments but land like instructions. The first time we met, she looked me up and down and said, "You have such a practical look about you. Miles needs someone grounded." I still don't know exactly what that meant. Lorraine and my father-in-law, whose name is Dennis, live about 40 minutes from Charlotte in a house they paid off years ago. Dennis is quiet, retired, and largely invisible in any conversation his wife is in. He smiles and nods and seems to exist primarily as an audience for Lorraine's opinions. Miles and I had been living in my South End duplex, specifically the upper unit, which I'd been renting to a young couple below. After the conversion, I'd moved into the upper unit myself. It was a good space, 2 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, exposed brick, and a back deck that looked out over the neighborhood. Miles moved in with me after we got engaged, and after we got married, we continued living there. The lower tenants moved out about 3 months into our marriage, and Lorraine immediately suggested that she and Dennis should stay there sometimes when they visited Charlotte. I said I'd think about it. I didn't think about it very long. I said no, I was already in conversations with a new tenant. That was when Lorraine first got cold. I noticed it in small ways. She stopped asking me questions about my work. She started directing all household-related comments to Miles even when I was standing right next to him. When we visited them for Sunday dinners, she would sometimes start a conversation with, "Miles, I was thinking the 2 of you should," as if I weren't there to have thoughts of my own. Miles noticed it too. He asked his mother about it once gently, and she said she didn't know what he was talking about and that she loved me like a daughter. Then she made a comment at the next dinner about how much she admired women who prioritized family over career ambition. I was sitting across the table and I didn't say a word. I just made a note of it, the way you note a pattern in a tax return that doesn't quite add up yet. Then came the conversation that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening in February. Miles and I had invited his parents over for dinner. My cooking, my table, my bottle of Bordeaux that I'd been saving for a special occasion, though this turned out not to be that. About halfway through the meal, Lorraine set down her fork, folded her hands, and said she had something she'd been thinking about and felt the family needed to discuss. I remember feeling the air in the room shift. She said she'd been talking to a friend of hers who had a background in real estate. And this friend had told her that the going rate for a 2-bedroom unit in South End was between $2,200 and $2,500 a month. She said she felt that as a married couple, Miles and I should be contributing to the family's financial future rather than, and this is almost exactly what she said, living freely in property that could be generating real income. I didn't say anything. I was processing the words, making sure I understood them correctly, the way I do when a client says something that doesn't immediately make sense. Miles said, "Mom, what are you talking about?" Lorraine said she thought Miles and I should begin paying rent on the unit. She had a figure in mind. $2,000 a month. She said she'd discussed it with Dennis, and they felt it was a reasonable amount given what the market supported, and that the money could go toward the family's shared expenses. Whatever that meant. I looked at Dennis. He was looking at his windglass. I looked at Miles. He had gone a little pale. I looked back at Lorraine and I said very calmly, "Lorraine, who do you think owns this unit?" She smiled the way you smile at someone who doesn't quite understand the situation yet. She said that obviously the family had assets, and that as Miles's wife I was certainly part of that, but that it was important for young couples to understand the value of. I said, "Lorraine, who holds the deed to this property?" She stopped. I said it again, not unkindly but clearly. "Who do you believe owns this building?" There was a long pause. She said she had assumed, given that Miles had moved in and that they were married now, that it was part of the family's shared situation, that Miles's family had helped him establish himself and that naturally, Miles said quietly, "Mom, Iris owns this." Lorraine looked at him, then she looked at me. Then she said, and I want to be precise here because the phrasing mattered, "Well, but you're married now. What's yours is his and what's his is yours. That's how it works." I excused myself to get dessert and took about 3 minutes in the kitchen just breathing. I came back out. I served the lemon tart. I let the rest of dinner be pleasant. I did not bring it up again that night, but something had shifted for me, because Lorraine hadn't just asked for rent. She had revealed an entire picture, a worldview in which my property was something she could make decisions about, something that existed within her family's orbit rather than in my name. And if she believed that, I needed to understand how deep that belief went. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention more carefully. I noticed that Lorraine had started making comments to Miles about the property, asking him questions about the tenants, about when the lease was up, about what the plans were for the unit below. She was asking him these questions, not me, as if he were the one who would know. Miles, to his credit, kept saying, "You'd have to ask Iris," but he also wasn't telling her to stop asking him at all, and that bothered me more than I admitted to him. Then one Tuesday morning, I was working from home when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a forwarded message from a property management company, not mine, that Lorraine had apparently contacted to inquire about the management situation for a duplex at my address. The text was a mistake. Someone had sent it to the wrong number. But it told me something important. Lorraine had gone looking for information about my building. She'd tried to find out who managed it, maybe who owned it. She was doing her own due diligence. I called my actual property manager and gave her a heads up. I also called my attorney. Miles and I had a long conversation that night. I told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said his mother was probably just curious and didn't mean anything by it. I said I believed him that she didn't have bad intentions, but that her actions had a pattern, and I needed him to help me address it directly. He agreed to talk to her. The conversation, from what he described, did not go well. Lorraine told him I was being paranoid and that she was simply trying to help the family understand their financial situation. She also, and this was the part that took my breath away when he told me, said she thought it was strange that Miles didn't know more about the properties I owned. She said it wasn't normal. She said that in a marriage, a husband should know what his wife has. I lay in bed that night thinking about Nana Joe's letter. Don't tell a man what you have until you know what he's worth. I thought about Miles. He was a good man, he really was. But I also thought about the fact that when his mother started asking questions about my property, his first instinct had been to reassure me that she meant well, not to tell her to stop. I decided it was time for a conversation, Miles, and I should have had a long time ago. I made a dinner reservation at a restaurant we both loved, a farm-to-table place in Noda that we'd been to on our first anniversary. I told Miles I had something I wanted to share with him, that it was important, and that I needed him to listen before he responded. He said okay. Over dinner I told him everything: the duplex, the conversion, the 2 university city homes, the trusts, the full picture. I walked him through it the way I'd walk a client through a financial summary, clearly, without drama, with specifics. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I told him about Nana Joe's letter. I told him about the advice she'd given me and why I'd followed it. I said I hadn't been hiding it to deceive him. I'd been waiting until I was certain of who I was marrying, and that I was certain now. But that the situation with his mother had made it clear that I needed him to understand the full picture, because I needed him to stand beside me on it. He was hurt. I understood that. We talked through it for most of the dinner and part of the drive home. He said he wished I'd told him sooner. I said I understood, and I was sorry for the part where the timing caused him pain. But I also told him clearly that my financial life was mine, that I was happy to share it with him as a partner, but that I wasn't willing to have it managed or discussed by his mother as though it were family property. He said he agreed with me, and then he said something that meant a lot to me. He said, "I'm going to talk to her, not as a suggestion, as a conversation that's going to end with her understanding that this is your property, your decision, and not up for her input." I told him I loved him. He called his mother the next day. I don't know exactly what was said, but I know that Lorraine called me that afternoon for the first time in weeks and asked if we could have lunch. We met at a cafe near her favorite boutique, the kind of place with white tablecloths and tiny portions. She was dressed well, as always. She was also, for the first time since I'd known her, slightly uncertain in her posture. She said she wanted to apologize. I let her speak. She said she'd overstepped. She said she hadn't fully understood the situation and had made assumptions she shouldn't have. She said she hoped we could move forward. I thanked her. I told her I appreciated the apology, and I meant it. I also told her, gently but directly, that I thought we needed to establish something clearly going forward. My financial situation, my properties, my investments, my professional decisions, were not topics that she and I needed to discuss unless I raised them. That I was happy to have her as part of the family, happy to have her in our home, and genuinely wanted a good relationship with her, but that the boundaries around my financial life were firm, and I needed her to understand that. She nodded. She looked out the window for a moment. Then she said, "Joe raised you, didn't she?" "Your grandmother." I said yes. She said, "I can tell." I didn't know what to make of that exactly, but it felt like respect, which was what I'd been waiting for. We finished our lunch. She paid, insisted on it. And we walked out into the afternoon together, not friends exactly, but something better than what we'd been. That was 3 months ago. Things are not perfect. Lorraine still occasionally makes comments that land sideways, and I still sometimes have to remind myself that she's operating from a worldview that took decades to form and won't change overnight. But she no longer asks questions about my properties. She no longer routes financial conversations through Miles as if I'm not in the room. And when she came to visit last month and I offered to show her the work we'd done renovating the lower unit, she walked through it quietly and said, "You have a good eye for this." Coming from Lorraine, that's an acknowledgement. Miles and I are okay. More than okay, actually. The conversation we had over dinner that night opened something up between us that probably needed to be opened. We have a financial advisor now, someone we both see together, and we're building something that belongs to both of us. Nana Joe's properties are still in my name. We talked about it. Miles understood. But what we build from here, we're building together. I still have Nana Joe's letter in the fireproof box under the bed. I read it sometimes when I need to remember what I know about myself. Don't tell a man what you have until you know what he's worth. I know what Miles is worth. I know what I'm worth too. And I know that the woman who sat across a dinner table in February and asked her daughter-in-law to pay rent on property she didn't own found out, calmly, clearly, and without a single raised voice, exactly where the deed was filed and exactly whose name was on it. Mine.